How honest should you be in relationships as a spiritual person? How much weight do I give to finances in relationship? What is my perspective on the use of AI? That's a really good question. I'm like Watkins, and this is a channel that's dedicated to sharing the spiritual perspective on everyday real life situations, things that you wouldn't ordinarily consider to be particularly spiritual. And I did something new for this episode. I'm doing a Q&A. I've got Dustin here from the channel behind the screen asking me questions, and I give the answer to the question from the spiritual perspective. A lot of these questions come from the comments that you all have left on the spiritual perspective videos. And as always, I would love for you to engage as much as possible. So like, share, comment on the video. If there are questions that I did not answer, leave them in the comments. And the next time we do a Q&A, I'll include some of your questions. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think, and let's get into the questions. How has spirituality been a consideration for my personal dating life? I had a woman come up to me once at a meditation event that I was hosting. And this was just after I had broken up with a girl that I was dating for a while, dating very seriously. In fact, we were living together. And she came up to me because she asked where my girlfriend was. And I said, we had just broken up and she moved out. And she had tears in her eyes, this woman. And she was an older woman, probably in her 60s. I was like, what's going on? Why are you upset? Like, I was the one that should have been upset. And she said, I'm just so sad. I said, why? She said, because if you can't make a relationship work, what hope is there for me? I told her that just because we are meditators and we practice this inner work, it doesn't mean that relationships are always going to work out for us and people are always going to like us. I said, but what it does do is it helps us to be able to pick up the pieces and move on faster than we would otherwise. So I would say that's a good way of looking at spirituality through the lens of relationship. How honest should you be in relationships as a spiritual person? That's a really good question. The first thing about honesty is that we kind of look at it as a society as an objective reality. Like, so saying I'm going to tell you the truth about something means that this is the truth for both you and me. But that's not always the case. We want to look at truth as being subjective, not objective. In other words, I have my truth, but then you also have your truth. And your truth may not be a shared experience with me and vice versa. So I want to be aware of the fact that we may have different truths about the same experience. And I want to be sensitive when I'm sharing my truth so that it doesn't accidentally invalidate your truth. When we get into arguments, disagreements, usually the disagreement, it may sound like it's about, who did what or who didn't do what or whatever, but really it's about you invalidating someone else's truth with your truth. And that's the sort of tightrope that we as spiritual people want to learn how to walk a bit better, is how do I express what I experienced without canceling what your experience was? And, this is like classic male-female differences in perspective, where the male looks at the perspective through a logical lens, the female looks at it through an emotional lens, and therein lies the difference. And if we're not willing to at least understand that the person we're in the relationship with has a different operating system from us, and we're just going to end up creating a lot of drama for ourselves. How much weight do I give to finances in relationship? I don't really give a lot of weight to finances. I don't think finances are really the most important thing. I think what's more important than finances is someone who's responsible. Now, obviously, finances are a reflection of responsibility, meaning you want to be with someone who's not in a ton of debt, unless that debt is a result of them really taking a big bet on themselves, and maybe they had a plan for paying it off, and maybe together we can come up with a way to pay it off even faster. But yeah, you don't want to see a track record of irresponsible decision making. And this is another thing about spiritual people, is we have a tendency to be a little bit delusional when it comes to these sort of real world issues like finances, and do things that we don't have any kind of plan for paying it back. And I tell a story in my keynotes about how I took a leap of faith and went to India to become a meditation teacher. And the funding mechanism for that leap of faith was a bridge loan that I got in the mail, which most people would consider to be junk mail. It was from a bank, and it was a cash balance transfer with 0% interest for 18 months. And then after 18 months, there was this ridiculous interest payment. But I had a plan for paying that money back before the 18 months occurred. And so I used that to help fund my trip to India to learn how to become a meditation teacher. And I was able to pay it off within a couple of months. So I think as long as you have a plan, then you can take what seems to be crazy leaps of faith and hopefully it works out. But if you don't have a plan, then it can kind of come off as being immature or irresponsible. How important is it for my partner to have a spiritual practice before they meet me? So this is going to sound a little egotistical, but I consider being in a relationship with me to be a spiritual practice. So even if they haven't had a spiritual practice before, but they find themselves attracted to me and I find myself attracted to them, then I know that inevitably things that I'm doing are going to rub off on them, because that's pretty much what's been happening over the years. So there's something in them that perhaps wants to engage in a spiritual practice, and that is informing the attraction that we have to one another. From a spiritual perspective, why do bad things happen to good people? Okay, this is an interesting question. When we say good people, usually we're referring to nice people. It definitely sucks when someone is really nice and really kind, and then something bad happens, like they get cancer or they lose all their money or they have a divorce. And we go, how did that happen to them? They're so nice, they're so kind. But we want to remember that from a spiritual perspective, the reason we come into this life is not to be appreciated by everybody. It's not to stay married. It's not to be healthy through 80, 90, 100 years. It's to learn things. It's to learn how to be better when it comes to love, when it comes to compassion, when it comes to generosity, etc. And here's the thing, really kind people are much better at loving and being compassionate and being generous than so-called bad people. And so if they've mastered that lesson, then a lot of times they've learned what they came here to learn, and there's no point in being here any longer. Now, what we're sad about are the circumstances through which they graduate from this life. And sure, we don't want anybody to suffer, but we're all going to check out at some point once we learn what we came here to learn. And I don't think you should feel sorry for people because something sad happened to them. There was a guru who once said, if we really knew how things work from a spiritual perspective, we would rejoice when people passed away and we would mourn when people were born. And I think that's a really intriguing perspective to sit with. What would I say to a perceived good person who is going through a bad situation? What we can assume from a spiritual perspective is that all situations that are challenging are helping to prepare us for whatever it is that we're here to learn. It could also be that someone is here to help you learn something about compassion or about generosity or about forgiveness. And so if that person happens to pass away and it's very difficult for you, meaning the person who's listening to this right now or watching it, it's very difficult for you to move on because maybe you didn't forgive them or you didn't say the thing that you needed to say to get closure in that relationship. That's a really hard but valuable lesson to experience. And then that opens you up to be a little bit more communicative, a little bit more loving, a little bit more forgiving in your other relationships. And so in a sense, that person who passed away took one for the team to help you with your spiritual lesson. So there's a lot of that that's going on too. It's not even really about the other person and their journey. It's about the positive impact that they leave on other people.
5 signs that your meditation practice is too complicated. Number 1, you rarely feel like doing it. Number 2, when you do sit to meditate, your mind feels like a fire hose full of random thoughts. Number 3, you're focusing on your breath or on something else. Number 4, your body gets antsy and you just want to lie down. And last but not least, you can't wait for the time to end and you feel relieved when it does. If any of these sound familiar, you're working way too hard in meditation. And here's the truth, most people are. But the good news is that the fix is embarrassingly simple, but you won't find it in a book or in an online course, not even my own. That's because learning how to master meditation is a lot like learning how to ride a bike or how to swim. Those activities are extremely simple to do, but impossible to learn without somebody teaching you the principles and then providing you with real-time feedback. And meditation is no different. That's why in the age of AI, I still teach live in-person meditation trainings. And if you're ready to master meditation, you're invited to Mexico City to learn how to meditate with ease, the way meditation was always meant to be learned. Just go to mexico.beginmeditating.com or click the QR code to get all of the information about the early registration discount. And I hope to see you in Mexico City very soon.
What is my perspective on the use of AI? I think it's fantastic. It reminds me of when the search engine came on the scene. And it was like this really amazing thing that allowed you to search the web and find relevant websites. It's just a more elaborate version of that, really. What the search engine did was it helped us to connect with other people that were doing the things that we were interested in. So it was never about the search engine itself. It was about the connection that we were making with people who had a web presence that we never would have found otherwise. And I think AI is kind of the same thing, where it's not really about the AI itself. It's about the connections that we're able to make more efficiently as a result of AI. So I know for me, I use it mainly for editing purposes. When I'm writing, when I'm responding to something, and I don't want to use a tone that I think would be perceived as inappropriate. And this is something that you would have to otherwise sleep on, and you'd have to run it by someone. Do you think this is too harsh or whatever? But now you could just ask AI, hey, I want this to be professional. I want this to be soft, but I want to definitely communicate a boundary here. And so it'll help you with that. But obviously, we've all learned that you can't take the first iteration of whatever AI spits out. You have to keep refining. You have to ask better questions. And I think it's training us to do just that. It's training us to ask better questions when it comes to our communication, when it comes to our interactions. And for those of us who really embraced it, it's allowing us to become better communicators overall. Because all AI is doing is reflecting the human condition. And let's be honest, most people are average, which means most of our questions, most of our contemplations, most of our conversations are average. They're not very deep. They're not rooted in trying to understand. They're rooted in our primal desires, which is trying to figure out what's in this for me, or expressing what our needs are. So as humans, we are quite selfish in our first draft of communication and action. And we have to go through some refinement to become less selfish. It's still selfishness packaged up as compassion or love or generosity or etc. But that's what the spiritual work is about. It's about peeling back those layers and learning how to see other people and other experiences as an extension of ourselves. So I think AI is a very powerful tool for that. How can spiritual people attract the ideal partner? When we talk about ideal partners, a lot of times, if we look at that from a surface level, we may think, oh, the ideal partner is the partner who makes good money, who has a great job, who's very attractive, and on and on and on. And what we're really describing is someone who allows us to be in our comfort zone. And from a spiritual perspective, those are not very important criteria, because spirituality is really all about growth. And it's about evolution. And what's going to allow us to grow and evolve more? Being with someone who's always telling us exactly what we want to hear, or being with someone who may say or do things that challenge us to grow and to expand our awareness and our understanding of the idea that maybe everybody's not like us. And so an ideal partner in that sense, from the spiritual perspective, could be someone who's very confronting. It could be someone who's so deeply entrenched in their truth that we have to grow and expand in order to include their truth in our understanding of how the world works. And so that person could be one of your most challenging relationships. And it doesn't mean that that person was a waste of time because they challenged you. Instead of making it all about what they're not doing, we always want to come back to, okay, what am I learning about this situation? And maybe you learned that you needed stronger boundaries for yourself. That's an ideal partner. Maybe you learned that you need to love yourself a lot more, so you don't choose people like that. That's an ideal partner from a spiritual perspective. So every relationship in that sense can be very valuable. What's the spiritual perspective on soulmates? So the conventional idea of a soulmate is someone who is placed on the earth just for me, and I get to spend a portion of my life in search of this soulmate. And I'm sitting around waiting for this rendezvous, this cute meet, as they say in romantic comedies, to occur. And then once I find this person, I'm going to be so in love, and I'll know instantly that this person is for me. In other words, if I'm having issues with somebody, then clearly they're not my soulmate. This is a very Hollywood version of what a soulmate is. I'm not going to say soulmates exist or don't exist, but let's just go with the presumption that they do exist. From a spiritual perspective, a soulmate is someone who's going to help you grow and expand spiritually. So again, any relationship with any person, whether it's a love relationship, could be a business partnership, could be a parent-child relationship, could be friends, any person that's challenging you and exposing areas where you may be stuck or you may be a little bit more limited in your thinking could be considered a soulmate. And you may have multiple soulmates. You may have a new soulmate for every season of your life. Now, the reason why I think it's powerful to adopt this perspective is because then you start to realize that every relationship is valuable, every interaction. There are no throwaway moments, in other words. And then that allows you to be more and more present throughout your life. And the more present you are, the more you're going to be able to find opportunities for connection, for compassion, for love, for growth. And it's through finding those opportunities and going deeper and deeper into those opportunities with the various people in your life that you're going to find the most fulfillment, as opposed to sitting around and waiting for this one special person to appear in your life and doubting whether or not the people who you may be having occasional disagreements with are supposed to be your soulmates or not. I think that's just the biggest waste of time from a spiritual perspective. Thank you very much for watching this episode. This was a lot of fun for me and for the team, and I hope you enjoyed hearing all those answers to the questions. If there's anything that seemed confusing to you, or if you want clarity on, or if you have any follow-up questions, please leave them below in the comments. And in the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, I've got another episode on the 7 harsh realities of doing your inner work. And then I have this episode about what I learned from meditating over 10,000 times. All right. Thanks again. I'll see you in the next Spiritual Perspective episode.